Welcome back to Hexen Studios. We're here today with Chris Combs, Steve Waterkotte from Combs Waterkotte Law Firm located in Clayton, Missouri. We're visiting again, which we're excited about, in Hexen Studios, which Hexen provides all things digital. So your presence on the web is what they do best, and they take your marketing to the power of X. So welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you guys back.
Good to see you.
I think today we're going to focus a little more exclusively on the DUI, DWI aspects, and then we've got a few subjects that we're going to cover, but first things first, what's going on in your lives now? What's new? Something new. You have something very new, Steve.
A new child, baby that's almost 1 month old on the 12th. So
it's exciting.
October 12th, had our third child. So hands are full right now.
Yes. Juggling 3.
That's right.
It's easier than 4. I know.
So
I can do 3.
Newborn 7 and 10 now.
And it seems like when you get a larger number, they sort of group and manage themselves better.
Yeah. Well, I got helpers now. So my
That's right.
10-year-old daughter, she's mother hen. So she helps out quite a bit.
Yeah,
Well, congratulations.
Scarlett is a saint. You just had a huge win out in Crawford County, though, too.
Yep. So we had a case that's been going on for about a year, which is pretty quick in the justice system to get it to trial. We actually, it was a client of mine, a young man, he was 20 years old, charged with 7 felony counts in Crawford County, Steelville, and we pled him guilty on the eve or 2 days before trial. The prosecutor gave us a real sweetheart deal. We fought the case tooth and nail. He was facing over 100 years in prison.
Oh my gosh.
7 felony counts, 3 counts of assault first degree, 3 counts armed criminal action, 1 count unlawful use of a weapon.
Oh my.
And ultimately he pled guilty to a D and E felony. Assault in the 2nd degree, a D felony, and unlawful use of a weapon, E felony. And we got him SIS probation, meaning obviously no jail time, and then if he successfully completes probation, he will not have a conviction on his record.
So we're going to pause so everybody can Google what you just said.
Yes. Caleb Sappington is the defendant, and it's a wonderful young man.
So this is a big deal, right?
It's huge.
To drop the conviction means he gets...
Like I said, from the outset, he was he spent about a week in jail before I got involved in the case. We got him out on a very low bond.
Oh, fantastic.
The circumstance, we asserted a self-defense case from the outset. Just very briefly, a car pulls up as him and a buddy are about to go hunting. So he's in his camo gear, rifles, his buddy's there, like any other day out in the country,
Sure.
Opening of deer season. He was very excited. And an unknown vehicle pulls up into a remote area. This isn't a neighborhood. You have to be looking for this house to
Sure.
find it. And a car full of 3 people arrived. They're unknown to my client and his friend. Verbal altercation kind of ensues. And then this is where the dispute is. The state would agree with all those facts, and then the dispute was whether or not the 3 folks in the vehicle pointed a gun at my client. We asserted they pointed a gun, at which point my client fired, hit one of the occupants in the vehicle,
Right.
and she was airlifted to the hospital. So we asserted a self-defense case from the outset. We took depositions, investigated it thoroughly. We were prepared to go to trial on it. I felt very strongly about a trial, putting that in front of 12 jurors in Crawford County. However, that deal was just too good to pass up.
Sure.
And I don't want to get too far off topic, but I think that brings up something interesting that Steve and I have been talking about lately, which is the cases we want to try, we don't ever get to try because, I just had a case recently, and I'm not going to get into the details, but, I wanted to take it to trial so bad, but my client was looking at 18 years at 85%, and I worked it up to where he got probation, and it's, the really good cases, you get the good deals, and then, clients are like, do we want to roll the dice at, 18 years, 85%, or we want the first sure thing? So Steve and I were talking about, he was so excited to try that case. But when you get a deal like that, I mean, you have to tell your client, look, you know, it's ultimately their choice.
It
but-
is,
Sure.
and that's the biggest thing, is that at the end of the day, it has to be the client's choice. It is the client's choice.
Of course.
Ethically speaking. So in any event, that
Big win.
he's 20 years old. It was too difficult to pass up a probation deal and roll the dice, although we felt very strongly about our case. I mean, think about that. Someone says, hey, you plead guilty to these 2 felonies. You're not going to have a conviction on your record, and out the door you go. Or do you roll a dice and go in front of a jury? You don't know what a jury's ever going to do, even though you can feel strongly about the facts of your case, your defenses. I mean, that's a hell of a choice, and I think most people would probably take the sure thing.
Sure. Well, benefit value, right?
Yes. So
I mean, what's it worth? Is
I
the
would-
risk worth?
that's right. I mean, that's risk and reward. And
Yeah.
I mean, if they offered us 20 years, that's a no-brainer. Let's go to trial.
Yeah.
You know, we started with a 15-year plea offer in which the prosecutor said, we're not coming off of this. Well, they came off of it after we worked the case, and I took depositions, and we had an investigator go to the scene.
Sure.
You know, we pieced it all together, and we believed, and then, you know, with the victims, I'll put that in quotations, their criminal history, I felt strongly about the case. But the client, I think, made the right choice, and we were happy to get that resolved.
It's got to be hard because the validation of getting to swing the bat, metaphorically.
As far as trying cases.
That's
yeah, you're ready. You got all your ducks in a row, and you're gonna win. You just feel it, and then
That's
you
exactly-
can't swing the
being head of
bat. You got to go
litigation,
back
yeah,
to the
front,
bench.
yeah.
That's
You're like,
ex- that's
it's
exact-
still a win.
That's exact. Well, it is absolutely a win, and we always got to put our desires. My desire, as Chris will tell you, I was chomping at the bit to try this case. In fact, my first court date in circuit court, I set it for a trial, which is almost unheard of.
That is unheard of.
I am ready
Unheard
to
of.
roll.
There we go.
I mean, the fact that we got this case to trial, it was going to be tried on 9/11 actually, and the incident happened November 20th. That's 10 months. That's almost unheard
That
of.
is unheard
Wow.
of.
And we pled him guilty on that day, and we came back for sentencing on Monday of this past week. So, as pumped up as I was to try the case, at the end of the day, we got to make sure it's not about me. It's not about
Right.
my ego. It's not about going to trial, trying to get a trial, notching another trial victory. It's about what's best for our client. And I think he made the right choice. It's tough to pass that up. If it were about me, I'd say let's
Just-
try every damn case.
Right.
That's kind of my attitude.
It's important to have humility, and I think in your profession, that's not as commonplace.
I'd agree. And like I said, we got to put
So
our.
it's nice to know that you guys
we got to
carry
put
that
our wishes and desires
carry that well.
second
put the
to
clients
to the
first.
clients.
So what's new with you? What's new in your life, Chris?
Not too much. I've got 2 little kiddos.
Two kiddos,
A
awesome.
couple birthdays coming up. My son will be 2 December 1st. My daughter will be 4 January 10th. Other than that, just really excited about Combs Waterkotte and where things are headed. And we've had a great year.
That's so awesome.
A lot of really good results on some really tough cases for very deserving clients. We're growing, and we're looking to add another lawyer. Actually put up the ad yesterday. We're starting to, talk and network to find another attorney. So things are good.
That's exciting.
Sometimes no news is good news. So I don't have a lot of news, but things are good. I mean, we're moving and grooving, and excited for the future, which is
Awesome.
always good.
We've got a lineup. So a few categories. We're going to cover the DUI. We're going to cover kind of the basics, which is sort of a generalization of what it is, what it means, how it works, what it means to be pulled over, like when you're pulled over, which is an important factor, folks to understand that, costs, affectations of insurance, professional affectations, employment, certification, and also my license, my record. So it's, those are big factors too, things to accept when you make a mistake in this situation, but also with hopes that you can find a way through it, which is what you guys do, which is why, that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it. So first question is basically, what is DUI, DWI. What's the difference, and how does it work with the Miranda rights, and what does it mean if they're Mirandized, and their legal blood alcohol levels, consumption levels? What are those? Those are a few topics we can touch on to start.
I'm happy to jump into this one first, Steve, if you don't mind. So
what is it?
Sure.
Exactly.
So DWI, DUI, I mean, it's used interchangeably in Missouri, except for if you're charged with DWI by drug intoxication, then that is typically charged as a DWI as opposed to a DUI.
Okay.
But it's driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence. However, they're pretty much interchangeable in Missouri. The way the Missouri Department of Revenue Code is written and the statute is written, if you blow anything below a .08, including if you have drugs in your system, they can't take any action against your license. So you could have a needle in your arm with heroin, nod off, hit some cars. It's tough to, they'll charge you with DWI by drug intoxication, but the way the Department of Revenue law and the statutes are written, they can't take any action against your license.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting. But
yeah.
I think the most interesting thing to talk about, and then I'll let Steve jump in, is just a general traffic stop. So, everyone has probably been pulled over at one point in time for speeding or rolling through a stop sign. But what people don't realize is that, every traffic stop should not turn into a search of your car or turn into a DWI investigation. At least one piece of advice, and then I'll let you kind of guide me a little bit more on what we want answers to. But, I can't tell you how many cases I see, DWI cases, where people, it could be me, it could be you, it could be anyone, have, one too many at happy hour, puts them just over .08, they feel fine, but the second you get pulled over and the question is, have you had anything to drink, and people try to minimize it, yeah, I had one beer, boom, that just went from a traffic stop to a DWI investigation. And then they're gonna ask you, do you want to blow or not? Do you want to get out of the car? Do you want to participate in standard field sobriety tests? So that is the quickest way to turn a traffic stop into a DWI investigation, is to make any admission of drinking. Even if it's a glass of wine, and you say you had a few sips, boom, you want to blow? And then it turns into, so.
So what do they imagine that they anticipate that the allegatory, the person that's alleged to be drinking and driving, if they say they've drank at all, they're exaggerating? Meaning that they're exaggerating that they've only had a little bit, or if they've had a lot, and how does that work with the truth of all things? I mean,
it doesn't really matter, unfortunately. It's just once you make that admission of that there's been any drinking at all, they assume impairment, and one thing, but again, a DWI investigation should not be to, it should be to detect impairment, it should not, there has to be reasonable suspicion to, turn this into a DWI investigation, but you're not using these field sobriety tests and the horizontal gaze nystagmus, the eye test, or the one leg stand, or the alphabet. You're not using that to confirm your suspicions, there has to be a reasonable suspicion there before. So we do a lot of DWIs. From vehicular homicide down to your first offense standard traffic stop, serious physical injury. I've got a young kid right now who hopped on the highway going the wrong way, bad accident. So
we talked about suspicion. That's a big part of clarity. With if they suspect you, what does that mean? How does that work? How can you explain that?
Yeah, well, once there's a suspicion, what they're trying to do is build a case. So we have three, what we
But where does it begin?
Vehicle observations. So
Okay.
there's kind of what we consider three phases of a DWI investigation by law enforcement. Vehicle in motion. Mm-hmm. That's swerving. NHTSA, National Highway Safety Traffic Administration, list out a number of clues that could be indicative of impairment. Things like swerving is the most common, failing to stay in your single lane.
Lots of high speeding.
high speedings, and there's a number of them. So vehicle in motion is kind of the first phase. Then the officer's personal contact with you, approaching your vehicle. Does he detect slurred speech, the odor of alcohol, the inability to follow instructions, such as, you have these divided attention tasks. You're listening to the officer and he's saying, do you have your insurance? Well, that requires you to listen and follow instructions. They're observing all these things. Does that driver have an inability to follow the instruction? Does that driver have the inability to, we're now having to grab out an insurance, go to the wallet to find your ID, and so they're observing all this. Everything that you're doing from which you don't even know, from the time they're observing your vehicle to then your personal contact is what we consider kind of the second phase of a DWI investigation. The things that I just talked about, your speech, your eyes, again, the ability or inability to get items that they're asking you for. Typically, it's your license and insurance. And then finally, the third phase is the testing phase, which is, standardized field sobriety test, SFSTs is the acronym that we commonly use. And those are the horizontal gaze nystagmus test, which is the pen or fingertip in front of the eyes, the walk and turn test, take 9 steps down and back, and then the one-legged stand test. So those are what we consider standardized by NHTSA, and so that's the third phase. So again, every single step of this process, they are building a case against you. And you don't have any obligation to do any of these things other than to provide your license and insurance as a driver in the state of Missouri.
Yeah, can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah.
You don't have to.
And I think we've talked about this a little. I'm just going to jump in quickly, and I want to give it back to Steve. But, there are some lawyers, and I think Steve will agree with me, that, they like to pick apart the walk and turn and what we call the 6 clues, what he was talking about, the horizontal gaze and nystagmus and, other things they look for per NHTSA. However, our advice is always the second that an officer believes or says they believe that you are under, the influence, or they ask you to blow or anything like that, is 1, decline to blow because all you're doing is giving them more evidence, and 2, refuse all standard field sobriety tests. Again, building a case. I don't want to overtake Steve, but again, that's what it is. They're building a case. So your only obligation there is to give your license and insurance, and we tell everyone be polite, be cooperative, but so many people say, I had to blow, I had to do this, you didn't have to do anything. If I got pulled over and the officer said, I think that you're under the influence, I would say, all right, there's nothing to argue about, take me into custody and then
fight it in court.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I had a client that, it was a friend of mine. He literally did nothing. He answered he gets pulled over, and he was polite. Yes, sir. No, sir. License. And outside of that, please call my lawyer. Not answering where I came from, where I'm going, how much did you drink? Refused all that. Was very polite, and he knew his rights. And that's where it's important if you to understand and know your rights. But it takes courage to be able to say that
in that moment.
You have a uniformed officer that's asking for things or
and
requesting.
Lights are flashing.
And
it's sensory overload.
Yes,
really.
But it is important in what he did in that case. I'm like, this is textbook, and it should be. I mean, for every drunk driver, you don't want to hey, here, but he did everything in that moment, and from the time he was pulled over, again, he was very polite, produced license and insurance, and outside of that, he answered no questions. Well, guess what? I mean, how much evidence did they not obtain? Because they weren't unable to do field sobriety test. Again, as Chris said, that provides them with evidence. They're scoring you on the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. They're scoring you on the walk and turn test. They're scoring you on the one-legged stand test. So in that particular case, they had nothing of that nature. He didn't submit to a portable breath test, what we call a PBT, which they often use at scene. Would you want to blow into this? No, sir. I'm not. You call my lawyer. So again, Now, what are they left with in this particular case? He swerved a little bit. Well, I mean, that doesn't mean you're drunk, right? I mean, people go on their cell phones and, messing with the radio, whatever the case may be. Swerving doesn't mean you're intoxicated. Now, give them a reason to pull you over. But think in that particular case, how much evidence they were unable to obtain. There's a reason they're doing this stuff. They're doing it to obtain evidence. They're doing it to build a case against you. And so in that case, we got that down to reduced down to a careless and imprudent driving.
Which is a traffic ticket with no alcohol component, no license suspension,
Correct.
nothing like that.
I mean, it's a game changer because I went in. They cited him for DWI, and again, like Chris said, well, give it to me, and then we'll fight it out in court. And it's our job once we get our hands on it to pick apart the police report. And after meeting with prosecutor and pointing out all these things, the prosecutor in this particular case was very reasonable. She understood the case was very weak. Again, so all these things that he understood, he had these rights. You can say no, but it's tough. I know it's easy for us lawyers to say this, but that's a big takeaway. Is that it's the same as like somebody, hey, can I search your car? No, you can't. I mean, if I were pulled over leaving here and a cop pulled me over and said, can I search your car? I don't have anything illegal in my car, but I'm going to say, no, you cannot search my car because that's my right to do that.
Right.
It's my right to say no. And so, again, probably easier for us lawyers to say this because we do this for a living every day and we read reports every day. But it is important to know your rights and then to have the courage to assert your right.
Sure.
Like in that particular case I told you, he said, no, I'm not answering. And he, and sure as, he did not submit to these tests. Those were not, they can't compel you to do that. You can say no. And
But they can compel you to do it.
They cannot.
But this is my question. So you say, no, I would prefer not to take this sobriety test or this stopping and walking, and
they can't physically get you out of the car.
Well,
and make
but
you
if
do
they
it.
say you're going to do it, meaning they're going to assert their command,
Correct.
even though they can't force you,
And that's the importance of knowing your rights.
and then having the courage to assert them. They phrase it in a way that you don't think it's an option.
Well, and here's something.
Well, that's my point.
I get it.
So the fear of being in that car, in the driver's seat, and saying, "Hey, do I disobey this officer of the law?"
I know.
But you're not disobeying them.
No, and like I said, there is a way you can do this and do it cordially, do it politely. It serves no purpose. I would say this always. To be a jerk during a traffic stop or any encounter with an officer, it will serve you no purpose.
Only hurt.
You can be polite, but take a stand, know your rights, and assert your rights all at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And again, back to that case, my client was very polite, never got belligerent, never was a jerk to the officer, and simply said, "No, sir. Will you do this? No, step out of the car." That, you probably don't have a choice, right? Once the suspicion is made, step out of the car. That is a command. He gets out of the car, and outside of that, where are you coming from? I'm not going to answer that, sir. I mean, those were like literally, and you almost never see that because people get nervous in the moment. They're scared. I mean, you're on the side of a road with a uniformed police officer with the lights. I mean, it's a scary encounter. Most people get nervous when they get stopped. I don't care if you have nothing in the car and you barely roll to stop. People get nervous. It's a police officer.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
They make the common, the general public nervous.
You feel responsible too, like you want to prove to them,
Yeah.
Sure.
or
And I
prove
think that's
that
an
you're
element too,
not.
where if I do this, I can maybe get myself out of
But
this.
you never are. I mean, once you start participating in standard field sobriety tests, they nitpick it so bad, like, they took a step before I
Right.
instructed them to do so.
Sure.
I mean, you're
It's-
getting arrested if
and
you
these-
participate in field sobriety tests. I mean, you just are. I mean,
I would
They've already
say,
suspected you.
If we conducted one, us three, none of us have been drinking, right? And we did this right now. These aren't normal behaviors. There's not a person our age, or unless you're some elite athlete that's doing plyometric training, that is doing one leg stand. How often are you on one leg?
You know.
Not. I mean,
But
we're
tell me-
all getting older.
Tell me how to go from K to W in the alphabet backwards right now.
I'm
That's what
not
I'm
going to
saying.
do
Those
that.
are some of the questions. Or count backwards from 77
And
to
then you gotta-
63.
And stop at a specific
No.
thing.
Yeah.
Most people have to do the alphabet. They start mouthing it.
You can't sing it.
I'll just Google it.
So my point of that is, as Chris said, these aren't normal human behaviors. Again, unless you're some athlete doing plyometric training on one leg and taking heel to toe steps, which is a balance test, and then a series of small steps after you did your 9, you got to turn a specific way. These are difficult.
Just to think a takeaway here is
Don't do it.
for the clients to realize, or alleged, that their alleged activities or whatever, it's not fair. It's not in your favor.
It isn't.
And it's not fair.
Well, here's one thing.
So don't do it. For that reason alone, hold your ground, and assert your rights.
That's right.
Absolutely. And I think another thing, and we started to brush up against this, and maybe we can come back to it later, but a lot of people are really just in complete, utter shock when I tell them, police are legally allowed to lie to you in their investigation. And they're like, what? I'm like, yes. And I always use the ridiculous example of, you could be in an interview room and they could say, we've got your DNA at the scene, and they don't have your DNA at the scene to try to elicit a confession. That is all fair game. So when applying that to what we're talking about in the DWI investigation, when you had mentioned, Scott, sometimes it feels like you don't have a choice, right?
Right.
Well, there's a lot of people when they say, I didn't have a choice, I had to blow. They said if I didn't blow, I was losing my license for a year. That's simply untrue, I mean, could you lose your license for a year? It's possible, but, law enforcement are not attorneys. They don't, there is due process. So you don't just lose your license for a year the second you make that decision on scene. There's due process to fight that. So, but again, a lot of people say, well, if I didn't blow, I was going to lose my license for a year.
Probably the number one thing we hear.
Yes, number
Did you
one.
submit to a breathalyzer? They said, yeah. Well, why?
I had no choice.
He said I'd lose my license, and then, yeah, could it be possible? Yeah,
More
like
often
Chris
than
said.
not, you don't,
But-
though,
right.
really.
Particularly on a first offense, and then you get into a whole bunch of, then by jurisdiction and so forth. But yes, they can lie to you. But looping back to what we said is, do not submit to them. Again, they're difficult tests to begin with. They're not normal tests that any of us do. Now you add alcohol into that mix. Good luck trying to pass it. And then you're on they're supposed to be objective criteria as to but they're subjective.
If they can lie,
can't keep a straight
it's just right. I mean, it's already subjective.
Yeah,
If they're going to lie to you,
watching you
you're
and
screwed.
going, this is how I score them. I mean, it's like, think when you submit an essay in school, and you did that to two different teachers, professors, you're not getting the same score back. This isn't some objective. It's similar to that.
I think you're callous to think that that's a possibility that much of anything in this life is objective. Everything you run into. I mean, we don't have to get into the philosophy of all things, but
With officers,
there's so much is subjective. So that's really key, a key piece of this to the takeaway from.
The moral of the story: do
Right.
not submit to.
Don't submit.
Don't submit to the breathalyzer, the portable breath test, and the standardized field sobriety test.
So don't do the test. Assert your rights.
That's right.
That you don't have to.
Ask for a
due
lawyer
process.
because per NHTSA, National Highway Safety Transportation Manual, they do have to give you 20 minutes to call a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
We beat cases on that issue quite often. I mean,
So when they ask you to submit to the when you're down at the station, and they ask you to submit to the breathalyzer, they're not going to tell you this again. Again, going back to knowing your rights. Once they ask that, you can say, I'd like an opportunity to talk to a lawyer. They are mandated to give you a 20-minute window, an opportunity to call a lawyer. I've been called in the middle of the night before.
Same. Many times.
Yeah, I'm just killing 20 minutes.
Yeah,
I just want to call and say,
first thing I
hey.
always say when they call and they say, hey, man, I'm in St. Louis County. I'm in, Sunset Hills Police Department. I go, let me ask the questions. I'm going to ask yes or no's to you. Because someone is listening, right? You're in a room, you have officers around in a sally port, in a booking area. And so at that point, once they tell me when I learn of the situation, so let me ask you the questions. I said, have you been drinking? Yes. Okay. Have you, that way they're only answering yes, no. The only
course.
thing an officer can hear on their end is a yes, no. And so then I kind of take over. And almost always, if we're at this point, I'm saying do not submit to a breathalyzer. They've already probably done or made their decisions, obviously, on the road because they're now at the police station. So I can't, we can't go back in time regarding the field sobriety test.
Right.
But so usually then there's the questions they'll ask you. And so I say, don't answer any of that stuff. So we're able to keep the officers or the investigator or whoever it may be from obtaining some evidence at this point, and it's been helpful. And so, but again, the officers will never tell you, hey, by the way, this is where you can request 20 minutes. Do you want to use that and call a lawyer?
Yeah, right. Can you make my case worse?
Right. So anyway, again, it goes back to understanding and knowing your rights. Which sadly not most folks don't.
No.
And
I didn't know that.
And if they do, it's usually because they've had some run-ins with the law and they've kind of learned a little bit along the way. Where you get clients that might know some stuff.
Get really good at the third DUI.
Really well, I remember on my first two, I didn't do this, or I did do this, I was told to do this.
Yeah.
Man, I couldn't remember what to do.
This is good. This is good. I think it's really important to get this information across to everyone that could potentially be in a situation like this.
Every traffic stop should not turn into a DWI investigation. Or
assert your rights, assert your rights, assert your rights. I think we're just going to repeat that over and over. Now we move on to the next topic, which is really like costs and insurance. So not that we need to know exactly how much it costs to handle a DUI, but what's to anticipate, not the legal costs, but the costs of the chain of events that occur from a DUI.
I would say, it costs outside of your legal defense, which of course can vary on who you plan on hiring.
Right.
And
that's all subjective.
Of course, yes. I mean,
it is.
You get what you pay for in this business, like anything else. With us, you have a full team behind you. 3-4 people, attorneys and whatnot, or touching your file. Not just one person, but expenses. Insurance, there's something called SR22 insurance. It's high risk insurance. When I first started doing this, 12 years ago, clients, would scream bloody murder about, the cost. Yeah. No one really says anything anymore. So I would say that I can't give you the exact number, but if you had to obtain SR22 insurance, which that's of course very case specific, whether or not you have to have that. That's one cost. And then there's some classes that you may or may not have to do. There's SATOP, Substance Abuse Traffic Offender Program. That's about $500 all in, depending on which level. There's a screening process, and then they place you in, a certain level class. There's Victim Impact Panel, which is an online class, like $90. So I don't know, what'd you say, Steve? Like outside legal expenses, like maybe you're looking at another $500,
yeah,
$600. I don't know.
More than that. I typically
$750 maybe.
Yeah, and it could vary too. The big thing is what number DWI this is.
Yeah, that is huge.
Because then you're looking at typically you can avoid fines on a first one.
Well, you mean succession of how many have you had? Number
correct.
two.
Yes, if you're on a second or third, I mean, again, as Chris said, you're doing a SATOP, you're doing a increased level course. It gets more expensive. Several thousand, a couple thousand. I mean, again, there's a big variance, but I always tell. I mean, they're going to nickel and dime you the whole way. People are amazed that you're like, wait, I got to pay to do community service. I don't know how many people get asked that. I mean, you're giving free work to the community.
Yeah. You got to rent the vest.
At an animal shelter, and you're an Elks Lodge, a church, or whatever, and they're like, I'm paying. Yeah, because there's these administrative fees and so forth. So they'll nickel and dime you. What I always say is, how valuable is your license? I mean, I've never had a client come into my office ever and said, I can afford to lose my license. Yeah. I don't care. And a lot of people work from home, right? I mean, especially in the wake of COVID and post-COVID. But nobody has ever come into my office and said, well,
I don't care about the license part of my case.
What?
I mean, your license is your livelihood, most people.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And even folks that work at home, you know, they
Have
still
kids
have meetings and kids and, you know, picking carpool up and taking kids to sports. And, you know, we use it's their one of our most valuable assets.
Sure.
And for most people, it's our way to a livelihood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I say to them, how valuable is your license? Again, you get what you pay for. You know, at Combs Waterkotte, we, you know, there's a lot of, I think, you know, a lot of attorneys that dabble in this area, which is kind of scary. What I mean by dabble in this area, they do a little bit of family law, they do like bankruptcy, they can do other areas, but I do traffic tickets and I do DWIs, first time or second, you know, misdemeanor DWIs, which is scary because most of us, or not most of us, all of us at our firm, we do CLEs each year, you know, where we're trained the same as the officers training in terms of standardized field sobriety tests. We know what to look for when we're watching that video. You know, if you're dabbling in this area, that's pretty scary. You know, it'd be like me going to venture in and saying, I'll handle your bankruptcy. I don't really do this. Or your divorce. I do a little bit of this. That's kind of scary. You know, divorce, you can end up on the wrong side of that thing and your life be flipped, right?
Well, it's like a...
And so you gotta, when, you know, one thing when folks come to our office about a DWI, you know, I tell them, and we all do, is that this is what we do every day. We do a ton of DWIs.
I read 100 alcohol influence reports, you know, and that's the packet with the pre-filled out with the steps and the.
Sure.
You know.
And so this, you know, it might not first offense. Okay, you're not going to jail. You're not going to prison. Yeah, it's scary to think that lawyers that don't do this often, or the clients or the prospective client is selecting a lawyer who doesn't do this routinely and does multiple areas of law, where at Combs Waterkotte, all we do is criminal defense and orders of protection. I mean, that's our entire, which are quasi-criminal. But this is what we do. I mean, so again, you wouldn't come to me for a divorce and I go, well, I kind of know a little bit and I can probably get you through this. Maybe there's not a lot at stake in terms of, you know, assets or whatever. You know, I'm probably not going to do. I'm not probably. I know I'm not doing as good of a job as somebody who practices in that area every day, right?
And I would say this is more specific to any other case type, almost, Steve. And correct me if I'm wrong, because DWIs are so technical, and there's so many things to be looked at.
And you got the license aspect, you know. So we have, you know, we
got
always two cases out of the same occurrence. You have criminal, and then you have the license aspect as well. So.
I think a good perspective to the metaphor or an analogy would be like you jump out of an airplane, and then right before you're ready to jump out, you're like, hey, who packed the parachute? They're like, well, my mother-in-law had a friend. He's done it a couple of times, so we're pretty sure you're good to go.
Right. I mean,
and then they just kick your butt out the airplane, and you're like, that's a no.
You're not enjoying.
And we get called.
I'm not okay with that.
Right. I mean, it's not uncommon to get, you know, a dozen or so calls or half dozen calls per month. You know, somebody that, hey, my friend's uncle is an attorney and he's handling this. So I don't think, you know, or there's been times when that friend uncle, who's a lawyer, has reached out to us and we've taken over the case because they get kind of in and they go, whoa, this is a little bit more than I, you know, anticipated, you know.
And I got a quick, just funny story about that. You know, I had a friend of mine years ago get a DWI and said, oh, my uncle is a intellectual property international attorney at Bryan Cave, which is a very prestigious law firm.
Yeah.
And, you know, brilliant lawyer, doesn't do DWIs, but worked out a pretty good deal on the criminal side of the case. Well, he calls me up and he goes, yeah, that case I handled, she just got pulled over and she got ticketed for driving while revoked. And I said, well, what did you do on the license side of the case? He goes, license side of the case? I said, yeah, you know, there's a 15-day time window where you have to file X, Y, and Z with the Missouri Department of Revenue. And, you know, here's a brilliant lawyer, but if you don't do it every day, I mean, there's so many things you can miss.
Exhibit A. I mean, that's Exhibit A. Why, when you're charged with a crime, charged with DWI, you would go to somebody who handles this exclusively, or that is 95% of our practice. You know, again, you're not going to go to you know, when you're selecting a doctor, you know,
Right.
you're going to find somebody that specializes. You're having a surgery done. What are you going to do? You're not going to a general practitioner and saying, hey, I need a hip replacement or knee replacement or open heart surgery. You're finding a specialist that does this every single day, right? I mean, it's no different in the law or anything for that matter in life. You're going to find somebody who specializes. When I have somebody build a deck or pour a patio at my house, I'm going to find somebody that does this every day, right? I mean, it's no different than anything in life. I mean, so it's important that when you go in there, and this, you know, when a client, and we have something on our website to for folks to what things to look at when you're hiring, what questions to ask, how to hire an attorney for your case. I mean, we provide information like that. What questions to ask? You know, it's almost the prospective client should be interviewing the attorney. You know, how much does this make up of your practice? What other areas of law do you do besides criminal? How much is made up of DWI? I mean, all those things should be asked by the prospective client. You know, so it almost should be, if they're doing their homework and they're diligent, and I would tell any of my family or friends or loved ones, is almost you're interviewing them. And again, that goes every area of law. If you're getting a divorce, go in there and you're charged with a serious crime. You go in and interview the attorney or the firm to get a feel for, is this the right firm? You know, and so again, you're going to find somebody, you want to find somebody that specializes in this area of law.
I mean, I think this goes back to as well asserting your rights to a police officer. And I think there's a level of ignorance which combines with fear, and when you take those two and blend them together, you just take for granted whoever you talk to or whoever speaks to you. Whatever they tell you is the letter of whatever law you are unfamiliar with, or the letter of any process through whatever a police officer might do. You just believe them.
And we see all walks of life with DWIs. That's another thing, you know. I mean, you know, doctors, everyone, you know, anyone can get a DWI. As I mentioned earlier, you have one too many at a
if you don't keep track.
Well, that's why it's so important.
I mean, you're talking one drink in an hour. One drink
spans all walks of life, all demographics, all races.
Sure.
You know, we've all had a drink and got behind a wheel, right? And that's not against the law, by the way. It's against the law to be intoxicated, but I've done that.
Or impaired.
And most people probably have at one time or another, if they're being honest. But yeah, I mean, it's you want to go to somebody that does this every day, that knows this stuff, that can guide you through the process.
I agree. And it's the variable in it, I think, is that the client, you deserve it, right? They deserve a proper defense.
Sure.
And they deserve to exercise their rights, whatever they may be, in the car, out of the car, no matter what. So you deserve it. And I think that's just what you guys have been trying to say. So you know, interview an attorney because you deserve a proper defense. Right. You know, and don't let the police officer bully you into doing something because you deserve to not have to do it. You don't have to.
The problem is that no one ever thinks, hey, I'm going to be in trouble, so I better understand and learn my rights. We just assume that we're never going to be in that position, right? Yeah. Nobody sits there and goes, well, I could be jammed up at some point. I could be on the side of a road or highway at some point. I better start studying up and figuring out what my rights are.
No. It's all, I would say, 99% of the time.
Nobody preemptively or plans to be in trouble.
Yeah, right? No, that's retrospective.
Again, back to, where we have some folks that know some stuff or might know their rights is because they've been in trouble and learned some stuff along the way. But again, nobody goes, hey, I'm going to be jammed up. I better know my Fourth Amendment rights or my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent or those kind of things. No one plans to be in trouble.
No.
So that's where you got to find, back to what we said, you got to find an attorney that knows what they're doing, that knows how to guide you in the process. You know, too many attorneys, particularly in the DWIs, it's get the case in, they get a plea offer, and let's plea it out, you know, and they might not even review the police report. They might not even request. I've taken over files for lawyers where they haven't even requested the body cam or the dash cam. You know, I'm like, how can somebody give intelligent advice to a client when they haven't watched the video, right? I don't take anything a police officer says at face value. I never will and never have. You know, so their report, again, subjective, it's their interpretation of what they observed, right? Our best way to figure out what happened is a video. And there's attorneys that we've taken over files, and I've taken over a file and requested their file from them, and they don't have the CD in there of the dash cam or the body cam. I'm going, well, I'm not taking that police officer's word, the police report, because, again, that's their interpretation of what they observed. Sure. Let me watch the video. And so, again, back to you get what you pay for. You need to find somebody that specializes in this area.
Yeah. And I completely
it's scary to think that there's
that.
folks that are being pled out guilty, and you know these stones haven't even been unturned. You know, in terms of what their investigation to get to the point of the finish line of the plea or advising a client whether to trial or negotiating with the prosecutor.
Yeah.
Without having all the evidence. And because, again, I'll never just simply rely on the report. That's an officer's subjective interpretation of what he or she observed. You know, let me watch that video. Let me see if it matches up, because I'll tell you this. You will be surprised by how often you're reading the report and simultaneously watching the video, and you're going, well, he stumbled getting out of the car. Well, I just watched it 5-6 times in slow-mo and zoomed in and whatever. That guy never stumbled.
It was sure-footed as could be.
You know, or he mumbled, or you know, he slurred speech, and I watched the video. Now, there's many times it's true, but then again, you'd be surprised by how many times it does not match the report. Well, he slurred because I thought he was crystal clear, or she was crystal clear in the limited words that she conveyed to the officer. So again, don't take the report at face value. It entails a thorough investigation, which, you know, that's what we provide when, you know, we have a DWI client.
Sure. And, well, they are suspicious. It's their goal when they pull you over to fulfill that suspicion.
Sure.
They think you swerved a little bit. So now
it's late at night.
They're immediately thinking, oh, he's been drinking, she's been drinking. So their intention is to lock you up with a DUI or a DWI.
That's correct. And they're approaching the vehicle, especially late at night. You swerve, maybe you're shooting a text off or finding something in your vehicle. They're going to approach a vehicle with that in mind, is that this is a potential DWI, and that's kind of what I'm looking for.
And what we're saying to them, what you guys are saying to them, is that you keep that in mind. Right. Don't do the tests. Don't answer the questions. Allow them to take you into custody. Allow due process to protect you, because our rights, you know, as citizens, we have rights, and we don't have to do these things.
Right.
And get caught up in some legal situation that just gets worse. And then again, you guys brought up is that, you know, don't allow your future to be handled by someone that you're unsure can protect it.
Bingo.
That's terrifying.
Absolutely.
But people do it all the time, which is why you guys are here. This is why we're doing this, because this is a huge impact on, you know, you can't prepare. It's often legal situations are in retrospect. You know, oops doesn't always work out. It's like, well, I got to figure out what to do about this problem that I've caused that I didn't realize, or coulda, woulda, shoulda.
That's right.
Doesn't matter.
And we're approaching holiday seasons. You know what that means.
Yeah,
a lot of parties.
Holiday parties. Yeah.
But we're not promoting to drink and drive.
And I mean,
of course not.
We don't promote crime either.
Yeah,
but
of course.
We're not, but no matter how much we advocate that we would, you know, not to burglarize and rob people or whatever, sell drugs. I mean, it's going to happen, right? It's inevitable to happen.
So if a cop thinks that you've been drinking.
And then when it happens, you have rights, and we are there to protect those rights, stand up for those rights, and assert them. Just
because they think you are doesn't mean you are.
Right. There's holiday parties. Everybody has a cocktail. Everyone, you know, I mean, we have Uber and Lyft and all that now, and that's been great, obviously, and it makes it so easy to not drink and drive, but nonetheless, thousands and thousands and thousands of people will do it, or have a few, or maybe you don't think you're impaired, but it doesn't take much. But again, as we approach that holiday season too, you know your rights, because this is kind of a time where you're going to see an increase in
Traffic stops.
in DWIs, you know, as we approach.
Well, they're looking
holidays.
for you.
That's right.
It's just like late at night. They're looking for you.
One thing Steve touched on, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but, you know, going along with knowing your rights and refusing, you know, and understanding that you can refuse, is that every little thing that officer is trying to build a case.
Sure.
So I think that's something that, you know, really needs to be, you know, taken home or hit home.
Yeah.
You know, it's worth highlighting because this, you know, everything, like Steve said, you reach for your license, you know, they're going to note that in their report, you know, fumbled around looking for, you know, so every little thing you do is going to be so, you know, why would you give them more and more and more? So,
Well, I think that was what we brought up earlier. Was what I said, and as someone that would just be driving, I'm not an attorney, so my first thought is I need to prove them wrong.
of course,
Yeah.
and that's
Right.
most people.
So
I can get myself out of this.
Yeah, well,
I can
I don't
work
feel
myself
like
out
I'm
of
drunk.
this.
I
I feel
didn't
fine.
drink that much. I shouldn't be, just because I swerved doesn't mean that. No, let me defend myself
Right.
with the officer and tell them everything that I did.
Yeah.
And they're just compiling all of that
Well, here's the other
to use
thing.
it against you.
The officer's just making an arresting decision, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then it goes to a prosecutor who makes a charging decision. So, you know, again, I mean, as long as a law enforcement officer thinks they have enough, which could be faint smotor of alcohol, okay.
Sure.
Well, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily impaired, but I mean that could end up in a DWI arrest,
Right.
and you have to understand that, you know, again that, like you said, know your rights. You know,
Use a professional
Call Combs
to
Water
defend
Cutty.
you. Right.
course.
We're
Don't
24/7.
Right. Don't defend yourself in the instance of this situation.
You're never-
Use a professional. Use Combs and Waterkotte. Use a professional to defend you in this
You're
situation.
never going to prove yourself innocent.
Right.
I can tell you, I've had DWIs where I get the video and I'm talking a woman in high heels just aces the walk and turn and the one leg stand, and still charged with DWI. But then you take it to a prosecutor and you're like, look at this video. You know what I mean? But still arrested. So what does that tell you? Why would you participate in those?
No, I'm not going
Sure.
to ever. No, just from talking to you guys now, I would have.
You call us.
Before this conversation.
24/7.
I would have. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll be honest. I would get out. I would do the movement. I would do the walk.
If they say,
or-
Scott, you don't blow in this machine, your license is
Yeah.
gone for a year.
Okay. I'll blow in it. Because I'm
Because you're scared and you
I'm
think, hey,
scared. I don't know what to do. I'm
And
just.
that's the big problem, lack of knowledge. You didn't
Right.
know.
No, I didn't.
You don't know what you
I'm
don't know.
terrified, and I'll just do what this guy with a badge tells me to do. That's just what I feel like I'm supposed to do, and we don't have to, which is phenomenal. In that situation, just understanding that one aspect is a big part of being prepared, you know?
Yep.
Being prepared to call you guys or being prepared on what to expect and knowing that you're putting yourself in a better position in the end by not making bad decisions, following protocol that isn't subjective protocol.